the All Blacks play at Twickenham, we were the only Kiwis in amongst a whole lot of English people, and the All Blacks won, of course, and we were, cheering and yelling and making a lot of noise. And at the end of the game, the English fans sitting around us actually shook our hands and said, "Well done, great game." I don't think that would happen here.
No. It happened to me once in South Africa, actually.
They're very polite and well kind of behaved, I guess. And it is a little bit tamer than games here. Like when you go to a test match at Eden Park, there is quite a lot of razzmatazz and there's music, and I actually quite like that. I think it's cool, yeah.
It doesn't detract from the vital tension of the match? No, because it's not playing during the game. It's just when there's a break or when someone scored or something like that. Okay. Dwayne, what do you think?
Strongly opinionated. Sevens is different than 15s. Sevens, razzmatazz, all the way. It's a festival. I went to the very first Sevens in Wellington. It was awesome. I had red hair, Canadian flag, supporting underdog, stash of treats. It was awesome. It was fantastic. 15s is different. It's serious. So I'm more for the natural guy, and I'm more for the Twickenham RFU sort of viewpoint there. I like it when the crowd has the ability to generate its own, energy. And personally, I'm the guy that thinks that I've got the ear of the referee by shouting at him. In 2005 Lions tour, I was surrounded by Lions supporters, and I reckon I helped that guy get sin binned, the English guy. I was shouting, and I'm sure I made a difference. I like that live and real sort of atmosphere of people. And here's my pet hate. Now, if you're going to support the Crusaders or the Canterbury team, they'll play Blur song too, like woohoo, that song when we score, but they'll also play it when the opposition scores. And I'm like, I'm not happy. Why are you trying to make me sing woohoo when I'm absolutely not happy? And I just think to myself, you're more concerned with the sponsorship and the money than the rugby, and that is a distraction. So I like it when we're close up and we're shouting, but I don't mind a bit of music, but we've got to be serious when it comes to 15s. Okay then, you've made your position clear. Yeah, I have, eh? Before we go tonight, this news out this week, Amazon.com rolling out the future. In 2 weeks, Amazon Key will begin in 37 cities in the US. It lets people into your house, and there's a camera you can use to watch them, Amazon Cloud Cam. And this service is being offered for up to $20, depending on how good you want the video. And you need to pay for the cameras and have a new lock on your front door, $250.
Let's say you need to remotely manage guest access to the front door of your home. Maybe to let in your dog walker, a friend, or maybe to let in a team of home cleaning ninjas.
Home cleaning ninjas. Courier drivers, the guy bringing the food bag, Jehovah's Witnesses, whoever. Would you like this idea?
I kind of like it because it's quite difficult to get courier deliveries where I live. So in theory, I like it. But in practice, I don't think I want strangers coming into my home. No.
Even if you can see them?
Yeah, but would I be watching them?
Yeah, that's
You'd have to know exactly when they were going to be there.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
if they come in and do something dodgy, you're not going to find out till later.
No.
Oh, no, just don't like it.
Okay, it wouldn't take off for you. How about you, Dwayne?
Yeah, my face is screwing up right now. Going, it doesn't feel right. Probably can't put words to it at the moment. But no, it doesn't feel right, does that?
Okay, so the future may be here, but you don't want a part of that future yet.
What about you,
You may
John?
come round to it.
What about you?
Maybe, yeah.
I'm a bit more casual about it, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, you see, I trust human nature.
Oh,
Panellists.
that's lovely.
Hey, Dwayne Major, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise.
And Nikki Bazant, lovely to see you, Nikki. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody, for your company, and have a great weekend if you're not working. And Checkpoint with John Campbell now.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, Struth mate Barnaby Joyce, he's been ruled ineligible to be an Australian MP by the High Court, courtesy of the New Zealand citizenship he got from his father. We're going to cross live to Australia. Quite an extraordinary state of affairs because Malcolm Turnbull has a one-seat majority. All of this unfolding as we go to hear. Also tonight, people going through the documents released about the JFK assassination. We're going to our correspondent, and we're also going to a Washington Post reporter who was looking at them really hard. And a single mother who took out loans to make ends meet while on a benefit is prosecuted by the Ministry of Social Development, which says that counts as income.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Anna Thomas. 5 of the so-called Australian 7 have been ruled to be disqualified from holding public office as a result of their dual citizenship with another country. The decision has just been released by Australia's High Court. It means the Australian government loses its 1-seat majority in Parliament. The Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, who has dual Australian and New Zealand citizenship, will face a by-election as a result of the decision. He says he wants to continue doing his best for his constituents.
I respect the verdict of the court, and of course, as you have no alternative but, and I'll be making sure that now we offer the people of New England the best service and continue on with jobs. All these things are important because while we're managing a nation, we've also got to make sure we look after the people in our electorate.
Barnaby Joyce. A group that campaigned for rail in Northland is celebrating after the Minister of Regional Development announced its revival in the region. The Minister, Shane Jones, says funds to build a rail line to Northport and modernise the line from Auckland have been set aside as a condition of New Zealand First's coalition deal with Labour. The campaign director of Grow Northland Rail, Albie Barr, says businesses in forestry, dairy and other heavy products will use the network, but the economic gains could expand further than that.
We've got the largest private engineering firm, Cullum's up here. They already do work for Kiwi Rail, for bridge spans and whatnot. And then we've got a manufacturer up here of concrete sleepers.
Grow Northland Rail's Albie Barr. Shane Jones says the project will cost up to $800 million and won't come at the expense of upgrading the highway to Auckland. The new government's plans to scrap the so-called Hobbit law, which prevents film workers from collectively bargaining, is being welcomed by actors who say it should never have passed. In 2010, the national government passed the legislation, but the Labour-led government has made repealing it a priority. Nita Blake-Person reports.
The law change was passed under urgency after an angry battle between the unions and the movie giant Warner Brothers, including Sir Peter Jackson. The new Workplace Relations Minister Ian Lees-Galloway says the law breaches a number of international labour conventions and changing it is a priority. He hopes the legislation to restore workers' rights will be ready within the government's first 100 days in office. Actors are welcoming the move, saying it has led to a significant deterioration in conditions for workers in the film industry. Nita Blake-Person, Aho.
Some of the previously classified documents tied to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy are being released on the US National Archives website. However, some federal agencies have requested documents to be censored or held back due to national security concerns. Here's our US correspondent Priscilla Huff.
Some 2,800 documents tied to the investigation into Lee Harvey Oswald's assassination of U.S. President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963, will be released, but online only as digital documents. Key agencies, including the FBI and CIA, requested that some of the documents be redacted, expressing concerns they might reveal national security sources and methods and relationships that are still critical today. U.S. President Donald Trump wants the final redactions formally sorted out within 6 months. Priscilla Huff, RNZ News, Washington.
More than 10,000 boxes and countless rolls of bubble wrap have been brought into Parliament as the Labour-led government moves into the beehive and National moves out. More than 500 MPs and staff will be shifting offices this weekend, and everyone had to be packed up and out of their offices by this afternoon. Jim Robb from Parliamentary Services says dozens of people will be working over much of the weekend to get the job done.
There'll be about 50 of us here on the precinct through the night and through the weekend. There's about 25 or 30 third-party contracted movers who'll be doing all the heavy lifting under our control. There's a lot of IT people working on a very complex matrix of equipment that has to move. The teams of security staff reprogramming everybody's access.
Jim Robb says the move should be finished by Sunday afternoon, ready for MPs and staff to start unpacking on Monday morning. The Franz Joseph community will get to have its say on whether the town should be shifted away from a major fault line. The town, which sits on the Alpine Fault and next to the flood-prone Waiho River, is home to 221 ratepayers, but gets more than 500,000 visitors a year. A report commissioned by the West Coast Regional Council has analysed 3 options for how the town could deal with the risks of a fault line and the river. One includes shifting the township by about 10 kilometres to Lake Mapaurika. The council's chief executive, Mike Meehan, says the option is one the community needs to consider.
There'll be quite mixed views on it, like anything. I think about opportunity for the town. It's definitely an opportunity to look at a much more resilient town.
Mike Meehan says consultation will take several months. It's 5:05. The Rugby League World Cup kicks off tonight with the defending champions Australia playing England in Melbourne. Australia are looking to become the first team to win back-to-back World Cups in 16 years, while England are chasing their first win against the Kangaroos since 2006. England forward Elliot Whitehead says they're banking on catching the hosts off guard in the tournament opener.
It's something you dream of as a kid, you know, to play for your nation against the host Australia in Melbourne. There's a lot of belief in this camp, you know. We know we're a good team, we just need to prove it.
Elliot Whitehead. And the Kiwis' first match of the tournament is against Samoa tomorrow night in Auckland. Halfback TJ Perenara has re-signed with the All Blacks through until 2021 as New Zealand Rugby continues its bid to secure long-term contracts with key players. The 25-year-old's new 4-year contract will also keep him with Wellington and the Hurricanes. Meanwhile, Wellington hope to end 4 years of languishing in the second-tier National Provincial Championship when they host Bay of Plenty tonight in the divisional final. The winner will gain automatic promotion to the Premiership for next year. 2 bogeys early in her second have lost New Zealand golfer Lydia Ko the lead at the latest LPGA Tour event in Malaysia. Ko, the the world number 8, started the round at 7 under par with a 1-shot lead, but has slipped to 5 under 4 holes to be 2 shots off the pace. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, a spring mixtape from the Music 101 team. Country life meets a Southland couple who farm without using inorganic chemicals. It's better for their health, they say. We find out why the shepherds are coming into Hunterville this weekend and bringing their dogs with them. And there's a Sonic Tonic dedicated to the songs and sound bites of rudeness on Nights, Minding Your Manners, Not, with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now looking at the short forecast until midnight tomorrow for Northland, cloudy periods and isolated showers. Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula, mostly cloudy with showers, possibly heavy about eastern Coromandel tomorrow morning. Waikato and the Bay of Plenty, occasional rain or showers with possible thunderstorms. Taupo, Waitomo, Taumaranui and Taihape, scattered showers with possible thunderstorms. Mostly cloudy tomorrow with a few showers. For Gisborne, occasional showers. Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, a few showers, becoming fine about the coast tomorrow afternoon. Taranaki to Wellington, mainly fine, a few showers developing in Taranaki tomorrow. Also inland Manawatu and Whanganui. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine spells increasing, isolated showers inland during the afternoons. Nelson and Buller, mainly fine, isolated afternoon showers about the ranges today. Mostly cloudy about Golden Bay tomorrow with possible showers. Western, Fiordland, Southland and Otago mainly fine, but cloud developing about eastern Otago and Southland tomorrow night. And for the Chatham Islands, mainly fine with a few showers clearing this afternoon. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas. Lots happening this afternoon. Coming up, we're going to go to the story of the single mother who took out loans to make ends meet while on a benefit and is being prosecuted by the Ministry of Social Development. Lots of feedback already coming in on that and the JFK files. People are going through them at high speed in the US as we speak, and we will talk to them as the program goes on, including a correspondent from the Washington Post. But we begin with this quite extraordinary development across the Tasman. Remarkable stuff, where the Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, also leader of the National Party of Australia, has been ruled ineligible to be an MP. Remember, Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull's government has a 1-seat majority. Joyce's sin, to have been a New Zealand citizen by descent from his father, whoops-a-daisy, under Section 44 of the Australian Constitution, as interpreted by the High Court, persons with dual citizenship are not permitted to stand for election for the Australian Parliament. Now, in total, the High Court has just disqualified 5 MPs, including Barnaby Joyce. All of this in the last hour. We're delighted to welcome to Checkpoint Australian correspondent Jason Morrison. Jason, are you there?
I am. I'm just amused at what a funny little country we are here.
Well,
our government is on the rocks right now, and everyone in Australia thinks it's a hoot.
Well, that's nice. I mean, you take your chair where you can find it, don't you? Look, I have to say, from our perspective, you're a funny big country, but that's you know, it's quantity, not quality, right?
Take your point.
Look, this can't have been unexpected. The Constitution is the Constitution, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a black and white rule book. No ambiguity about it. And Barnaby Joyce would have known the moment the spotlight was on his ancestry that he'd kind of forgotten about. And you can't blame him, really. I mean, there's a bloke that was born in country New South Wales. You will not find more of an Aussie, we use the phrase ochre, than Barnaby Joyce.
No.
His father was born in New Zealand. He was injured in World War II. Moved to Australia in 1947, met up with his mother over here. Parents married in 1956. They made their living here working as farmers. And then suddenly their son's a Kiwi when he's the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia. Figure that out. But that's the Constitution. The Constitution has no ambiguity about it on this. If you've got it in your heritage and you haven't renounced it, you're up the creek without a paddle.
Yeah, you are. A very Australian creek. Of course, the High Court wasn't judging the rights or wrongs of this. It wasn't making any kind of subjective determination about whether this was a good rule or whether Barnaby Joyce should go. It was just interpreting the Constitution. But he has renounced his New Zealand citizenship, bless him, and there will now be a by-election, right?
Well, he has now. Yeah, he has now. See, the problem with this is, and you know, people who've put their hand up to run for political office know this as well as anyone, but it doesn't just like you put your hand up and, you know, wow, I got elected. I mean, it's a long process. You've got to go through pre-selections with parties. They go through your background, they check you out. You sign half a dozen statutory declarations to say you're this and you're that, and you didn't do that and you didn't do this. And one of the things you sign says that you are absolutely an Australian. You absolutely have no heritage elsewhere that can be drawn upon in any allegiance. And he signed that. And the thing about it is, if she stopped and thought about it, he'd probably say, oh, yeah, look, Dad was a Kiwi, I wonder if I should check that out. But he didn't check it out, and that's the problem. Now, I actually like Barnaby Joyce, and I'm ashamed about it. I think he's a tremendous fellow, and I think he's done very well in the areas and zones of politics he's had to be in. As a Deputy Prime Minister, I like having a bloke who's a little bit different to the rest of the political class in Australia who are a little bit up themselves. And yet, here's Barnaby Joyce, who's a very straightforward fella, but one of the things he forgot to do was check the fundamental thing. And you know, it's a bit like sort of being a long-haul truck driver and forgetting you didn't have a licence. You know, he forgot that he had New Zealand citizenship. He should have sorted it out. And you've got to support the Constitution. You can't just pick it for the ones you do and don't like. And on this front, you've got to back the Constitution. And thankfully, the High Court judges saw it that way, because the moment you go bending the black and white of that book, you've not got much left.
No, you haven't. Right, two questions, and I'm enjoying this conversation enormously. Thank you so much, Jason. Question number one, he's going to romp home in a by-election in his electorate, isn't he?
Should do,
yeah. OK. Question number two, how embarrassing is this for Malcolm Turnbull, who has a one-seat majority and that seat's just been evicted?
Yeah, probably he's lucky because Parliament's on hold right now. Parliament finished up, it's on a break, and the only time you can lose the confidence of the Parliament is when Parliament's sitting. So the by-election will probably be resolved before Parliament returns. So is it embarrassing? I mean, he still has his commission to run the government. You know, he still is the Prime Minister of Australia. He still has the moral authority of it because nothing's changed in many respects, apart from the fact that if he walked into the Parliament right now, there's a very good chance, although I'll explain you in a second, there's actually a way out from here, a very good chance if they were to challenge confidence in the government, they could lose. But there is another problem for them, and for the other side, there's the Labor Party that's very aspiring to get into power and probably very likely to. they have a parliamentarian who's on leave of absence at the moment because of a family tragedy that's happened to her, and so her number's out too. So, you know, not that anyone would be looking at it like this, but you knock out both of them, it's neutral. So the impact at the moment, I think, is that the government just has to really, you know, govern on and kind of pretend nothing's happened, because they're going to assume they're going to win this by-election. They probably will. Because, see, the people up in Tamworth elected Joyce with the most pronounced majority, I think, of anyone in the country. So he's very popular. And frankly, country people and most people around the country are pretty peed off about this whole process because, you know, it's a waste of money. I mean, it's a waste of money. We're going to have another by-election. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, you know, we've got a lot of issues pressing in Australia right now. And government debt spiralling out of control. And here's a bit more we've got to borrow now to keep it all going. So it's you know, it is a bit farcical. But Turnbull's problems are far bigger than losing his Deputy Prime Minister. He essentially has lost the Australian people, and that's going to be the biggest challenge for him.
Yeah, that's entirely more problematic. Jason Morrison, we can't thank you enough. That was exhaustive analysis and insight, and this has only happened about an hour ago. We really appreciate you joining us live from Australia. Thank you so much, Jason. It is 5:15. Fascinating Australian politics at the moment. Let's head home. A single mother who took out loans to make ends meet while on a benefit is being prosecuted by the Ministry of Social Development, which says that counts as income. The ministry says she failed to declare the loans as income and should pay the government back $120,000. Now, the woman is appealing the decision in the High Court in Auckland, and Eva Corlett was there.
The woman, who has name suppression, was approved for a benefit between 2005 and 2010 because she was an unemployed solo parent. Both she and her children have health problems. As well as receiving government support, she took out loans from her parents, a finance company and the bank to stay afloat. But the Crown lawyer Nixon Fong told the court those loans qualified as income, breaching her benefit obligations and putting her $120,000 in overpayment debt.
It has been recognised by this court that social security benefits are to be reserved for those who truly need them. Financial support will only be provided after claimants have, down to a defined limit, used the personal financial resources available to them.
Justice Davidson questioned the Crown over how a loan from a parent could be considered a resource to the beneficiary.
They can't insist upon it, they can't enforce it. The family member may not be required in any way to provide them assistance other than on a family support basis. So why should that be regarded as a resource of the beneficiary?
Mr Fong replied a loan only becomes income once it is used for income-related purposes, such as paying bills, expenses or rent. He argued that a person who has money at their disposal to meet recurring living needs cannot be considered in need of a benefit. But the beneficiary's lawyer, Frances Joychild QC, said it had never been MSD policy to make beneficiaries disclose loans. She said her client was always upfront about her finances and never had cause to declare the extra support she received. She warned the court that people could be cursed to poverty indefinitely if they were prevented from seeking extra support through loans.
Business loans from financial institutions, familial loans to afford housing, educational grants and loans. These are in fact real, tangible solutions that enable single mothers and the unemployed to grow out of poverty and enhance their children's future. They would be removed from beneficiaries, and that seems entirely contrary, if not antithetical, to the intention behind social security as a whole.
Ms Joychild said the ministry is radically undermining the social security law and its lawmakers would be turning in their graves. She said it's ludicrous the loans are considered income when they have to be paid back.
Her borrowed money was simply for the purposes of supporting herself and her children while living on a benefit that was in itself unable to relieve her of hardship. And the ministry's own statistical research and reports show that this is the case for beneficiaries.
Ms Joychild said the benefit is not enough to lift someone out of hardship. The judge is expected to make a decision in the next few weeks. I tāmaki makaurau mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Eva Corlett, tēnei.
Exactly 5:19. Let's turn now to the JFK Files, released today, 53 years and 11 months after the 35th President of the United States was assassinated while riding in a presidential motorcade through Dallas, Texas. Now, conspiracy theories have abounded non-stop ever since. And today, following great fanfare from President Donald Trump, many of the documents that have been withheld for nearly a century have been released. Many, but not all. We'll have more on that coming up. But we begin with the BBC's Nick Bryant.
November the 22nd, 1963.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
Not just one of the most shocking days in American history, but also one of the most disputed.
President Kennedy has been assassinated. It's official now. The president is dead.
The official explanation is that John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas by a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald. But the case has never been closed in the American mind. Were the Soviets involved, the Cubans, the mafia, renegade elements within the government he led? The National Archives holds 5 million documents on the assassination. 99% have already been opened in some form. But it's that final 1% of mainly CIA and FBI files that's so intriguing. Fueling the conspiracy theories, the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald by Dallas nightclub owner Jack Ruby. He died hours later. The documents may reveal more about a trip Oswald made to Mexico just weeks before, where he met Soviet and Cuban spies. It's more than 50 years since America mourned the loss of its young leader, a national wound that has never truly healed, and a chapter in the national story that has never had a satisfactory ending. The assassination of John F. Kennedy was a turning point not just because a 46-year-old president had been cut down in his prime, but because many Americans came to believe that their government simply wasn't telling them the truth. Part of the reason why Congress ordered this document dump was to regain that lost trust. The historical irony is that the decision to release the files rests with a modern-day President, Donald Trump, who's promoted JFK conspiracy theories himself. But will they bring a sense of closure?
It's the BBC's Nick Bryant. So as Nick says, the release of more than 2,800 documents may or may not bring a sense of closure. We're going to discuss that and whether they further or answer the conspiracy theories with Steve Hendricks from the Washington Post. He's still going through them. But so far, according to our US correspondent, Mary McCarthy, there isn't a document that's a single smoking gun.
No. I mean, there's the fact is there's just simply so much to dig through. It's incredible. What I find incredible about the release of this document is that everybody has access to them right in front of us. This isn't like, 25 years ago when documents were released. We now have the internet, and we can sit in front of our computers and click on any of these 2,800 documents and see them, actual photocopies of the handwriting, of the parts that have been redacted, crossed out with black ink. And obviously it was the evening time here in the U.S. when they were released, and I suspect many people will be staying up all night looking through these, seeing if they can finally solve the mystery of who assassinated JFK.
It's extraordinary. I'm looking at the same material that you're looking at. It's a little bit like when the Panama Papers happened, right? Everyone is trying to find the secret. But, the old faded Imperial 66 typeset, I mean, this stuff is half a century old.
Absolutely, and it's even much more, just the historical factor and the fact that the longer since something happened, the more theories there are floating around. It's much more sort of closer to the heart for Americans than even something like the Panama Papers, which was obviously a worldwide scandal. And as you look through them there, John, you'll see that there's sort of the first things people are pointing out is all the connections that Lee Harvey Oswald had, both to Mexico, to Cuba, and to Russia. Much of them was already public knowledge, but sort of going into greater details, seeing the reaction sort of in real time that the USSR had to the assassination of JFK. It's sort of like a bunch of Hollywood movies being released at once.
Yeah. Is anything, though, actually proven in terms of a cause and effect relationship between either Cuba or the USA and Oswald?
That's certainly not what I found. I'll call you back if I find anything.
Call us first, Mary.
It's interesting to look at the media here because people actually aren't really headlining on this because I think whether it's the New York Times or CNN or all the big U.S. media, they obviously want to be careful, go comb through things and sort of, bring out the important things day by day, hour by hour. But there's no big headline here. And in fact, it's like a lot of things that we expect or are hoping for a smoking gun to pop out as a big headline. The fact is that most of it probably won't be very controversial at all. I was looking at some things about how the USSR reacted, and they were sort of alarmed by, the instability that this assassination could create in the U.S. worldwide. So even though, of course, then at the time of the Cold War, they were America's great enemy, they actually were hoping that, there'd be some stability and that America would get through this transition. So it's actually just showing sort of, in fact, the goodwill behind the great powers at that time rather than any terrific, unpredicted conspiracy or scandal. So maybe something will come out. We'll know certainly in the coming days and weeks. But for now, lots of good reading, but no smoking gun.
No, the broader context for our younger listeners is, of course, the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the world really did teeter precariously on the brink of something unimaginably terrible. That was in 1962. JFK's assassination is in 1963. You can see why people want to join the dots wildly here, but you can also see that in some sense the Soviet Union by that stage had resiled somewhat from its position in 1962. And it wasn't in their interest to have to deal with a new US president, really, was it?
Absolutely not. In their reaction, they were sort of saying that they were hoping that there wouldn't be some great new instability created, and then also saying that they did believe, however, that there was a group behind this, whether that was the vice president at the time who became president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, or some other group. So it certainly wasn't in their interest to be going around assassinating U.S. presidents or pushing for that. But they also did think that given the, obviously, the gravity of assassinating the U.S. president, that there might be another group involved. And then, of course, it brings us to today, where we have certainly not the Cold War, but a different set of geopolitical tensions happening, many of them involving the U.S. and Russia, questions of collusion, and we have diplomats being pulled from Moscow, Havana, Washington, similar things happening all over the place. So it does make one sort of question, when all this really began and when it will really end, I guess.
Our US correspondent Mary McCarthy. Later in the programme, we're going to talk to Steve Hendricks from the Washington Post, who is going through the documents. Home again. The government is following through on one of New Zealand First's election promises, saying it will prioritise the revival of Northland's rail network. Now, the Minister of Regional Development, Shane Jones, says it will spend up to $800 million to build a rail line to Northport and modernise the line to Auckland. Laura Tupou reports.
Shane Jones says work will begin as soon as practically possible, and in his opinion, it can't come soon enough.
I personally would like to see some of my ne'er-do-well nephews out there with picks and shovels before Christmas, but we're not able to meet as a cabinet until, I think, this Tuesday, and then we'll be able to lay out the program for various ministers.
Mr Jones says the cost of the branch line to the port will be up to $200 million, and upgrading the rail corridor out of Auckland will cost up to $600 million. The campaign director of Grow Northland Rail, Albie Barr, says he can't believe the news. He says he had to phone the New Zealand First office to confirm it.
It's an outstanding result for Northland, for rail, for a lot of people. Economic development for Northland, huge. It's something that as the campaign director, you dream of getting a result.
Mr Barr says businesses in forestry, dairy and other heavy products have committed to using the network, but the economic gains could expand further than that.
We've got the largest private engineering firm, Cullum's up here. They already do work for Kiwi Rail, for bridge spans and whatnot. And then we've got a manufacturer up here of concrete sleepers that's been exporting over to Australia. So as much as possible, we'd like to work with these companies to make sure that we create the jobs and the opportunities opportunity and keep the money in local business.
Shane Jones says he knows many Northlanders want to see a better highway to Auckland. He says the money for the rail upgrade stands alone, so won't affect any roading projects. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Laura Tupou ho.
Now, later in the program, we will talk to Shane Jones about his plans to plant 1 billion trees, government policy obviously, and get more unemployed people into work. Carrot and stick is the phrase du jour. The New Zealand women's under-17 basketball team has made history in being the country's first women's basketball team to qualify for a World Cup ever. The team beat Thailand in the quarterfinal of the FIBA Asian Championship in Bangalore overnight, securing a place in next year's World Cup in Belarus. The team includes Taylor Dalton, the daughter of the late netballer Tanya Dalton, and Charlize Lega Walker, whose mother, Leanne Walker, represented New Zealand in basketball at 2 Olympic Games. Laura Dooney reports.
Taylor Dalton's father, Dwayne, woke his sons in the early hours of this morning so they could watch their sister score 11 points in her team's historic 80-52 point win against Thailand. Dwayne Dalton says he was incredibly proud of his daughter and her team, whose victory helped them secure a spot in next year's World Cup. He says his daughter, who just turned 16, has been very homesick while she's away.
But the game side of things has been a real highlight for her. She loved competing and very much like her mother is often playing with a smile on her face.
Mr Dalton says Taylor is also a keen netballer and at some point may have to choose between the two sports.
But a lot of her mum's friends sort of rallied around her, and people like Donald Lophagen, who represented New Zealand in basketball and netball, have sort of helped her and been giving her a bit of advice.
Dwayne Dalton says the team worked hard for 12 months leading into the tournament and the calibre of all the players is outstanding. He's already looked at flights to Belarus so the family can join Taylor at the World Cup next July. Chief Executive of Basketball New Zealand, Ian Potter, believes the win is a sign of things to come for basketball, saying more and more young men and women want to play.
That increases our talent pool. This is a very talented young pool of women that are away playing. So we have every reason to think that while this is tremendous and that it's the first breakthrough, it won't be the last.
Mr Potter says Basketball New Zealand is working on providing better opportunities for young people to play basketball across the country and retaining talented players with their sights on overseas scholarships. For Checkpoint, Laura Dooney.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ, and thank you for being with us. 29 to 6, 28 and a half to 6. Coming up on the programme, Parliamentary Services bring in the moving vans as 500 staff and MPs move offices this weekend. That's the business. And we understand Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull is due to speak on the Barnaby Joyce situation. We will have the latest from the top in Canberra. But first, here's Anna Thomas with the headlines.
The Australian government has lost its one-seat majority after the High Court ruled the election of the Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce invalid because of his New Zealand citizenship. Mr Joyce says there will be a by-election in his New England electorate in early December. A single mother is appealing in the High Court a Ministry of Social Development decision to prosecute her for failing to declare loans she took out while on a benefit. The ministry says she failed to declare the loans as income and should pay the government back $120,000. The Minister of Regional Development, Shane Jones, says the new government will spend hundreds of millions of dollars on reviving Northland's rail network, including a rail line to Northport. Actors are hailing the new government's plans to get rid of the so-called Hobbit law, which stops workers in the film industry from bargaining collectively. The new Labour-led government says it hopes legislation to restore workers' rights will be ready within its first 100 days in office. The new Minister for Treaty Negotiations, Andrew Little, says he is open to all proposals as to how the Ngapuhi claims might be settled. Mr Little says he'll be briefed by officials next week on the history of the Ngapuhi mandate dispute. He's then planning to head north and talk to all those involved about their thoughts on what should happen. Some of the previously classified documents linked to the 1963 assassination of the former President John F. Kennedy are being released on the US National Archives website, but last-minute lobbying by US intelligence agencies has meant some government documents will still remain secret for now. And demolition is now underway of a large building that caught fire in Auckland last night. At its height, crews from 13 fire engines battled the blaze at the Concrete Pipe Sales Centre on Great South Road. And those are the headlines.
Let's turn to business news now to end the week with Nona Peltier. Our business reporter's gone home sick, but we've got Richie McCaw on the bench. Giles Beckford coming in.
That is the one and only time in my life that anybody will liken me to Richie McCaw.
What I'm saying is thanks for being there, Giles. We really appreciate it, because I don't even think you were meant to be at work today, were you? So thank you. Yesterday we were hearing about a transfer firm likely to disappear from the stock exchange. Today they look like they'll be replaced by one coming on the boards, will they?
Indeed, we were saying bye-bye to Flyways yesterday.
Yeah.
Today we're saying hello to a new Plymouth-based trucking company called Transport Investments Limited. It's been a private firm, started 30-odd years ago by 5 blokes. 20-odd trucks was the beginning. 900 trucks is roughly what they've got now. So these 5 have been with it all the time. It's been in private hands. It's just quietly expanded through the regions. They had been looking for, and this is a problem that faces a lot of baby boomers now, is how to secure the business, how to get a little bit out of it for themselves, but how to secure the business for the future. And the way they're doing it is they're doing a reverse listing on to the stock exchange. This is where a shell company, and in this case it's called Bethune Investments, which has got nothing. It's just got a name and a piece of paper that says it's a company, but it has the magical NZX listing, and they're basically being, in a nominal sense, being taken over by Bethune's. It will change its name, adopt all their rules, all their people, all their structure. Hey presto, you're an instant stock exchange member. And that will suit them quite nicely. It means that the founders can take a little money out of the company for their retirement, and that they secure the company not just for themselves but also for their employees. I think they're making provision for employees to be involved in the shareholding as well. So for them, we'll see them go through the paperwork, but they should be on the boards in a reasonably short time.
Thanks, Charles. Some big labour market numbers today, were there?
Well, there will be. I always like to be ahead of the curve where possible,
okay,
John.
Right.
Next Wednesday, we're going to see the September quarter numbers for the labour market. That will be employment, unemployment and wages. Now, expectations are that somewhere around 20,000 jobs will have been created in the past 3 months. That will be in contrast with the June quarter, when in fact the economy lost about 15,000 jobs. The unemployment rate should stick somewhere around 4.7, 4.8%. If it dips down a bit, it will get to around an 8-year low. That will create some excitement. And on the wages front, the expectation is that for the quarter, wages will have risen about, or just under 1%. Now, everyone will go, I haven't seen a 1% quarterly wage increase in my lifetime. And what this, in fact, will be is the effect of the equal pay settlement into the aged care sector. And so it's a one-off. But the reason why I mention this is because, if you remember, the incoming government has set employment as likely to be one of the instructions, one of the mandates for the Reserve Bank to follow. At the moment, it's just to keep inflation around the 1 to 3% target zone. They're now going to give it an explicit instruction to also maintain full employment. Now, we don't know how that will be defined and how it will go there, but these sorts of numbers now become quite important. The Reserve Bank normally does look at them, but nobody else sort of really knows how they go through their works. We'll start to see a little bit more analysis and comment, I think, about the wages numbers and the employment numbers in the future. That's why I just highlight these ones today. Yeah, thanks, Charles. How the markets end the week? Well, the market was looking positive for most of the week, and we thought that we'd end up on a high, but unfortunately it turned soft in the past hour, on the last hour, down a couple of points for the top 50 at 8,085. For the New Zealand dollar, still under pressure at 68.3 US cents, 89.5 Australian. If it stays like this or even goes a little bit lower, we should be saying that we're going to have more expensive petrol and more expensive Christmas presents. And that's business for another week, John. Thank you very much. Giles Beckford, donning the black jersey and running off the bench, our business editor. We really appreciate it, Giles. 22 to 6. The rail expenditure that we were hearing
hearing about earlier in that piece from Laura Tupou about the line to Northland is one example of the new government targeting regional development. The planting of 1 billion trees over 10 years is another. Job creation in areas of high unemployment is a central objective. But will the creation of jobs alone be enough? Canterbury argues yes, the country's lowest regional unemployment rate is in the area rebuilding after major earthquakes. But Shane Jones thinks that in some areas of high unemployment, like Northland, despite the rail line and despite the trees, both a carrot and a stick will be required. A carrot in terms of the jobs themselves and a stick in terms of the response to unemployed people who refuse to accept work when jobs are available. I spoke to the new Regional Economic Development Minister this afternoon.
Look, the $1 billion planting strategy throughout the regions is going to have to deal with the fact that many of our younger Māori men in areas such as Kaitaia and Kaikohe are not work ready. Many of them are already in the receipt of the dole or other types of benefits. And I'm as keen as mustard to see the $1 billion tree strategy at an entry level, bringing young men in particular and women back into the workforce, teaching structure, teaching things that in my generation we took for granted. And if it needs a bit of stick as well as carrot, then that really speaks to the values that I bring forward as a politician.
If we look at that area that you talked about, Kaitaia West, for example, the 2013 census, the unemployment rate there was 19%. There aren't jobs. Now, if you're creating jobs, that's a good thing, isn't it? That's not a work for the dole situation. That's just a work situation, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, though, that employers in the north have to be respected as well. Many of them tell me, John, that, and I'm using the term nephew figuratively, the reality is a lot of our young men, they've got other lifestyle problems, lifestyle addictions, etc., and I want to work with them. But I am not a supporter where jobs will be created by dint of our climate change and billion tree strategy. The jobs are there. They will be working. I'm not in agreement for our own people to be whiling their time away on the dole. I'd rather have them work ready, and this billion tree strategy over a 9-year period is certainly going to be job rich.
So you are creating work. Why do you have to wrap it in this kind of punitive language? Isn't job creation a good thing? Won't people rise to the occasion if there are jobs for them to do?
Well, that's my hope, but I do know by talking to employers, it's going to take as much as stick as carrot.
So if you're going to plant 1 billion trees and you are creating the very large number of jobs that will inevitably, of course, be associated with this, why do you think a stick is required? Don't you think people will look up and think, meaningful employment, thank God I'm off? Or do you have a sense that there are people who, for whatever reason, and I'd love you to explain that, those reasons, still won't want to participate?
Well, I think sustained bouts of unemployment in our rural Māori communities is not a problem we can simply explain away with academic language. I am talking about young people who have seen their parents in a largely unemployed state, and unfortunately they've grown up in circumstances where hopping into the labour market and then using that as a trajectory to go on and do something else hasn't happened. Now, whether or not they will all respond to entry-level jobs planting trees, I hope that is the case. Where it's not the case, I don't think it's acceptable for my young people in the north, where there are jobs, where they offer a very good starting wage, that they should remain in beneficiary country. I just don't agree with that at all.
So what will you do? So this is where the stick comes in, right? What will the stick be? How will it work?
Oh, well, in terms of the application of the stick, obviously I have to talk that through with my colleagues, John, in fairness to them, but no one should be under any illusions what mix of whakaaro and feelings I bring to this task. I have a view about pockets of our young people that, sure, a job through this climate change strategy of 1 billion trees will be available, and they will be trained to take it, but there's got to be within their own spirit a willingness to change their lives, take on this role, and improve the lives of their families. And I may be talking more as a Māori than a politician, but I'm also talking as a senior member of my own community.
Yes, you are. And you're from Awanui, right, which is a short drive from Kaitaia, which has had that unemployment rate peaking at about 20%, 1 in 5, which is such a terrible figure. And I want to look at your story, because I was just reading your maiden speech, and you've had an extraordinary life, and it seems to me you responded to the carrot, which was the support of the local community, and you ended up at Vic, at Auckland, you went to Harvard, right?
Yeah, Dad was one of 17 children in Awanui, and our grandmother was a stalwart for our local Anglican church. And when I was 12 years old, the Anglican church gave my mum and dad and me a scholarship, and I was the lad from our community who won that scholarship to go to St Stephen's School.
That's right.
I have never, ever once walked away from a sense of obligation to give something back to the people who saved their pennies and sent me to St Stephen's School. And when I won my scholarship, or shall I say when I was awarded the scholarship to go to Harvard, I had handsome offers. I had handsome offers to stay in America in 1991. But it may sound a bit corny and old-fashioned. I had been ably assisted by my then boss, Dr. Roger Blakely. I was assisted also by Royce Elliott, who chose me to be a Harkness Fellow. There was nothing else I was going to do, buddy, than come back and work amongst my fellow Kiwis in whatever industry opportunity afforded me, and I've never ever shirked from that.
Doesn't that wonderful story speak to what happens when early interventions are meaningful, when we stop Māori children dropping out of school, when we give Māori children a sense of possibility, when we enable and ennoble by giving kids aspirations? In other words, isn't your stick still the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff?
Well, I have a great deal to do with deal to do with our Māori community. I never wear it on my sleeve. I am a contributor to initiatives in our community, and I never ever want any recognition for the ways that I contribute, such as helping out our rangatahi who went down to the Māori League tournament, Māori Rugby League tournament in Rotorua. So my approach is a mix of compassion, but my approach also is reflective of my upbringing. And in that part of provincial New Zealand, where you are likely to hear in the Māori language, ma te wera wera, which means by the sweat of thy brow, as well as having a hand up. And the church certainly gave me that to go away to St Stephen's School, and the contributions of my mother and father. I shouldn't deprecate that. So I think that my style of dealing with our rangatahi and with families is to call it as it is. There are pockets of dysfunctionalism, and I don't think you can rely purely on people to see the opportunity in its full to its full extent until they're jolted from the lifestyle choices that they've made.
Shane Jones, let's stay in the north, where there's new hope in Ngapuhi of rebuilding the pre-settlement talks that stalled before the election. Former Labour leader, lawyer and union boss Andrew Little is now in the hot seat as Minister for Treaty Negotiations. And he told our Northland reporter Lois Williams he's open-minded about how a settlement or settlements might be achieved.
As a new Minister for Treaty Negotiations coming into the role, I wanted to take time to understand and talk and establish relationships before I start thinking that I've got any right to start, telling people what solutions might look like.
Andrew Little is under no illusion that the taki he's signed up for is going to be simple. It's big, it's complicated, it's fractious, it's Ngapuhi. But Mr Little says he put his hand up for the job because he has a deep interest in treaty settlements and he's followed the grievances of the Northern Iwi closely. Rudy Taylor, the co-chair of the Hapu Alliance Te Kotahitanga, is a senior member of Labour's Māori Council and no stranger to the new minister.
When he became the leader of the party, I gave him Anne Salmon's report that Ngapuhi never ceded sovereignty, and he read through that whole report and he acknowledged us. So, you know, at the end of the day, I'm glad to sit down with him.
The Hapu believe the changing of the guard at the Beehive will end what they see as stubborn government support for the Ngapuhi mandated authority, Tūhoranuku. National accepted Tūhoranuku had the right to represent Ngapuhi in treaty negotiations, only to be told by the Waitangi Tribunal that it had recognised the mandate of an empty structure. For months, the Hapu Alliance, Tūhoranuku and Crown officials worked together on a plan to fix the mandate and fairly represent Hapu. But Tūhoranuku's leaders, Hone Sadler and Sonny Tau, would not agree to it. And a month before the election, Bill English called time out on the project. The other co-chair of the Hapu Alliance, Peter Tipene, predicted last week that without the support of National, Tūhoranuku was toast.
I don't think anyone will be fooling Andrew Little about what's going on. I think he'll be well informed. Certainly all of the paperwork is there, and we will get a durable settlement for Ngapuhi with Andrew Little and the coalition government that's in place.
The chair of Tūhoranuku, Hone Sadler, says he's looking forward to meeting Andrew Little, although challenges lie ahead.
There will be a new perspective brought to bear, and I'm hoping that after all this time that the incoming minister will take the bull by the horns and address the issue with the mandated body, and that's Tūhoranuku.
Mr Sadler says the Crown became too involved in fixing the mandate and the resulting plan went well beyond what the tribunal wanted. He says the bottom lines for Tūhoranuku are still dedicated seats for urban Ngapuhi, the Runanga, Kuia and Kaumatua, and just one settlement for the whole iwi. The Hapu and Te Kotahitanga say that's just the old guard trying to cling to power. They're looking at multiple settlements based on the same 6 Hapu clusters they formed to take their claims before the tribunal. Andrew Little says he's open to such ideas, but he'll be listening to all points of view.
At the moment, we've got the conflict, if you like, between Tūhoranuku and Kotahitanga. The mandate, as it is at the moment, or was once upon a time recognised, hasn't been. And it's a question of whether or not there's enough will amongst all the various Hapu to want to explore a different way to settle it and to commence negotiations.
Mr Little says he'll be briefed by his officials next week and he hopes to get up north very soon to meet Ngapuhi face to face. For Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
Thank you, Lois. Actors are welcoming the new government's plan to repeal the so-called Hobbit law, which prevents film workers from collective bargaining. The law was introduced after a bitter industrial dispute between unions and the movie giant Warner Brothers, including Sir Peter Jackson. Nita Blake-Person reports.
In October 2010, the John Key-led government did a deal with Warner Brothers to ensure the Hobbit films stayed in New Zealand. It offered the studio giant bigger subsidies to make films in New Zealand, costing it another $33.5 million, and agreed to the labour law changes, which were passed under urgency. The government claimed the law changes were the result of uncertainty caused by several unions boycotting the Hobbit films, but it was later revealed that an agreement had already been signed ending the dispute, and the government knew that when it passed the legislation. Labor fiercely opposed the law change, and incoming Workplace Relations Minister Ian Lees-Galloway says changing it is a priority.
Our current law, as it was changed by the previous government, denies one group of workers in one industry a right which is actually guaranteed to them by a number of international labour organisations which New Zealand has signed up to. So we're in breach of a number of conventions right now.
Not surprisingly, that news is being welcomed by Kiwi actors. Actress and president of Equity New Zealand, Jennifer Ward-Leland, says the time of the boycotts was horribly extreme and the law should never have been passed.
At the time that it came out, it sort of came out of left field for us because that certainly wasn't something that we were challenging at all at the time, a change to the employment status of actors. We were just looking at terms and conditions on the movies being equal to our overseas colleagues. So that law sort of literally came out of left field.
She says the law has led to a significant deterioration in conditions for workers in the film industry.
It stops that whole whole race to the bottom thing, and I think there were sort of so many scare tactics that somehow this, bunch of actors were somehow going to send production offshore when, I think we all know fairly clearly that productions will go where the rebates are good.
Ian Lees-Galloway says the new government will work quickly to repeal the law.
We're looking to restore a lot of workers' rights that have been diminished over the last 9 years, and that is a priority for us. It's something that we want to have the legislation at least introduced within the first 100 days of government.
Mr Lees-Galloway says Labour will be prioritising workers' rights now they are in government. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Nita Blake person aho.
A change of government means a change of office for more than 500 MPs and staff. Labour is moving out of the opposition wing of Parliament and into the Beehive and Bowen House, while National is moving the other way, and it's all taking place at Parliament this weekend. Our political reporter Sarah Robson went to find out what goes into making all that happen.
Around Parliament, there are boxes stacked up in offices and corridors, and there are pieces of art and other fragile items wrapped up in bubble wrap. They're all clearly labelled with colour-coded stickers for their new destination, the Beehive, Bowen House or Parliament House. Even the pot plants get labelled. All up, 550 MPs and staff will be shifting office, and Jim Robb from Parliamentary Services is the man in charge of making sure it all goes smoothly. He explained the office swap while wandering along one of the corridors in Parliament House that's currently occupied by Labour.
So the National Party come into where Labour are. Traditionally, the government of the day occupy the Beehive with the ministers, and the primary opposition party have the top floor of Parliament House, and they keep filling Parliament House down through the lower floors until they all get in. So all of Labour will come out of these offices, and all of National will come out of both the Beehive and Bowen House and fill in here.
Mr Robb says more than 10,000 boxes have been brought in for the move, not to mention countless rolls of bubble wrap. But how many people are involved in the move this weekend?
There need to be about 50 of us here on the precinct through the night and through the weekend. There's about 25 or 30 third-party contracted movers who will be doing all the heavy lifting under our control. There's a lot of IT people working on a very complex matrix of equipment that has to move. The teams of security staff reprogramming everybody's access, recovering keys, and just imagine how many keys there'd be.
And what happens if a box gets lost?
We'll find it. Having the 3 different coloured labels to the 3 different buildings, and through the decant it, check it, switch buildings, check it, then uplift it, we will know the box was in the right building and we'll hunt it down. It won't get lost. It'll be somewhere.
When it comes to unpacking on Monday morning, Mr Robb says some former ministers might find themselves with a little less space than they've become used to.
When I see the number of boxes, it's going to be a little bit of a wry smile when they come in on Monday morning and how we're going to fit in here. But, it's probably like a circle of life. As we all get older and move out of our big family homes, we start to downsize, stuff has to be culled.
A new office won't be the only change some MPs are dealing with. Many also find themselves with a new job. One of them is Green MP Jan Logie, who's the new Parliamentary Under-Secretary to the Minister of Justice on domestic and sexual violence issues. But she admits she's still working out just what that entails.
I came in my maiden speech talking about my commitment to changing our culture of violence in this country and putting victims of domestic and sexual violence centre in our decision making, and I'm so absolutely stoked to be able to get a chance to do that.
Do you know about resourcing?
I don't know the details yet.
And some MPs with new jobs will have a pay rise to go with it. Take the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who this time last year had a salary of around $160,000. In the top job, she'll earn more than $470,000.
I know that for working people that is an extraordinary jump. I've got to make sure that I'm constantly aware of the experience and the living standards for working New Zealanders, and I am aware of that, and I have been as long as I've been an MP.
On the flip side, those National MPs who are no longer ministers will be facing quite a drastic pay cut. Atu i te whare paremata, mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
Let's return to our lead story, this fascinating state of affairs. Australia no longer has a majority government after Australia's High Court ruled Barnaby Joyce ineligible for office, the Deputy Prime Minister. There will be a by-election. The opposition is now turning its attention to see if decisions made by Mr Joyce's minister can be challenged in court. With the government's minuscule majority eroded, now there will be this by-election, but as Sydney Morning Herald's chief political correspondent James Massola explains to our producer Bridget Burke, although Mr Joyce may still be the favourite, for now, all bets are off.
This is a massive blow to Mr Joyce and to the Turnbull government. He will go to a by-election on December 2. He'll face a Melbourne Cup field of candidates, including perhaps Tony Windsor, his bitter rival. And what happens is anyone's guess. He's probably the favourite still, but anything can happen in a by-election. We'll wait and see.
Mr Joyce seems open to accepting the verdict.
Yeah, he in fact said at his press conference that he, in his guts, had anticipated that this might occur, which is bizarre given the sort of messaging from the government about being very confident in the Solicitor General's advice. Now we're headed to a by-election and all bets are off.
So what happens for the government now?
Look, we'll have one sitting week where the government will have 75 seats in the 150-member lower house chamber. It's not no longer a majority government. They're not quite a minority government. It's an opportunity for Labor to create havoc. They've also said, the opposition, that they're going to be looking at some of the decisions that Joyce and Senator Fiona Nash, who also a minister, made while ministers to see whether they are now valid and whether, in fact, they may be challenged in court. I think the government would like to see constitutional change. I think it's very unlikely, though. Only 8 of 44 referendums have passed in Australia since we became a Commonwealth. I don't think anything's going to change here today.
You've been covering Australian politics a long time. Have you seen anything like this before?
No, never. No one has. It is absolutely unprecedented.
That certainly is the case. It's Sydney Morning Herald's chief political correspondent James Massola talking to Bridget Burke. What an amazing day. The JFK papers out in the United States. Barnaby Joyce, the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, ruled by the Australian High Court ineligible to be an MP because when he was elected, he was a dual citizen of New Zealand, courtesy of his New Zealand father. Absolutely fascinating. It's coming up to 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. Australia's Liberal-led government has just lost its one-seat majority, with the High Court ruling disqualifying the Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce from Parliament because he was a New Zealand citizen when elected. An Australian political correspondent, Jason Morrison, has told Checkpoint the court had to uphold the law.
That's the Constitution. The Constitution has no ambiguity about it on this. If you've got it in your heritage and you haven't renounced it, you're up the creek without a paddle.
Jason Morrison says Barnaby Joyce, who's also the leader of the National Party, is expected to win a by-election easily. Mr Joyce renounced his New Zealand citizenship in August. A group that campaigned for rail in Northland is celebrating after the Minister of Regional Development announced its revival in the region. The Minister, Shane Jones, says funds to build the rail line to Northport and modernise the line from Auckland have been set aside as a condition of the New Zealand First's coalition deal with Labor. Mr Jones says the project will cost up to $800 million. The campaign director of Grow Northland Rail, Albie Barr, says businesses in forestry, dairy and other heavy products will capitalise on the network. He says a local manufacturer of railway parts could also directly benefit from the upgrade. Mr Jones says the project won't come at the expense of upgrading the highway to Auckland. The Actors Union is welcoming news that the so-called Hobbit law, which was at the centre of a bitter industrial dispute, is set to be repealed as part of planned changes to employment law. In 2010, the key government enacted legislation classifying all film workers as independent contractors, meaning they could no longer bargain collectively. The new Labor-led government says it hopes legislation to restore workers' rights will be ready within its first 100 days in office. The organiser of Equity New Zealand, Melissa Ansell-Bridges, says the original law should never have passed. Last-minute lobbying by US intelligence agencies has meant some government documents on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy will still remain secret, at least for now. The killing in 1963 has been widely written about and has been the subject of numerous conspiracy theories. The ABC's North America correspondent Connor Duffy has more.
Experts and authors have long argued this release of documents could be embarrassing to the CIA and FBI. The assassin Lee Harvey Oswald had visited Mexico City weeks before the killing and visited the Soviet embassy and Cuban consulate. Some have posed the theory an intelligence failure led to the killing. President Trump authorised a last-minute decision to allow an extra 180 days for intelligence agencies to argue for other material to remain suppressed.
Connor Duffer reporting. A solo mother who borrowed money to stay afloat while on the benefit is being prosecuted by the Ministry of Social Development. The ministry says she failed to declare the loans as income and should pay the government back $120,000. The woman, who has name suppression, borrowed money from her parents, a finance company and the bank to help provide for her and her children who have health issues. The Crown lawyer, Nixon Fong, told the High Court in Auckland those loans qualified as income, breaching her benefit obligations and putting her in overpayment debt. The woman's lawyer, Francis Joychild, warned the court that people would be cursed to poverty if they're prevented from using loans.
Her borrowed money was simply for the purposes of supporting herself and her children while living on a benefit that was in itself unable to relieve her of hardship. And the ministry's own statistical research and reports show that this is the case for beneficiaries.
Francis Joychild, QC. The new Minister for Treaty Negotiations, Andrew Little, says he is open to all proposals as to how the Ngapuhi claims might be settled. Mr Little says he'll be briefed by officials next week on the history of the Ngapuhi mandate dispute. He's then planning to head north and talk to all those involved about their thoughts on what should happen. Andrew Little says he put his hand up for the treaty negotiations portfolio and he hopes his skills as a lawyer and union negotiator will be helpful to Ngapuhi. Demolition is already underway of a large building that caught fire in Auckland last night. At its height, crews from 13 fire engines battled the blaze at the concrete pipe sales centre on Great South Road. It backs onto rail tracks and the threat of it collapsing cancelled trains this morning. Fire crews have now left the site, with Fire and Emergency saying a fire investigator is likely to take some weeks to finalise his findings. The building's owners, Goodman Property Group, say demolition is already underway to lessen the impact on rail commuters, particularly given major events such as the Rugby League World Cup this weekend. Its Chief Executive John Dakin says the building was fully insured and should be fully down by tomorrow morning. It's 6:05. Wellington hope to end 4 years of languishing in the second tier of rugby's championship competition when they host Bay of Plenty tonight in the final. The winner will gain automatic promotion to the premiership for next year. Having beaten Bay of Plenty by over 20 points in pool play, Wellington are heavily favoured to win Bay of Plenty. Forward Callum Retallick believes his side can turn things around.
They've got big carriers and they get over the gain line, and then after they get over the gain line from their forwards going wide, it's pretty easy. You know, you're on the back foot, you're kind of chasing a bit, so it's key for us to really get into them at the start and slow down their front foot balls.
And that was Callum Retallick. Did you have something to say, John?
Go Wellington!
Tomorrow night, Canterbury host Tasman in the Premiership final. New Zealand's first Formula One driver in over 30 years, Brendan Hartley, is feeling more pressure heading into his second Grand Prix in Mexico on Monday than he did making his debut earlier this week in Texas. Here's our sports editor, Stephen Hewson.
After the Texas race, Toro Rosso confirmed Hartley would compete in the final 3 races of the Grand Prix season, presenting him with a royal chance to gain a full-time contract for 2018. Hartley says the expectation on him in Texas was quite low, but it's now building ahead of the Mexico race, although he's feeling confident, while at the same time trying to remain relaxed. He says Texas was a steep learning curve, but believes he'll be able to push the car more in Mexico as he's developed more understanding of it. The Hermanos Rodriguez circuit in Mexico City has special significance for New Zealand motorsport fans. It was where the late Denny Hulme, driving for Brabham, won the Formula One championship 50 years ago. This is Stephen Hewson.
And that's the news.
Tomorrow morning, David Farnay is about to portray Martin Luther King, warts and all, in The Mountaintop. He'll join us along with the play's director, Pasitua Amisa. Cartoonist Tom Scott has just written a memoir, and Jamie Joseph on her ongoing battle against African wildlife poachers and the corrupt system that protects them. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast. Until midnight tomorrow, cloudy periods for Northland and isolated showers. Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula, mostly cloudy with showers, possibly heavy about eastern Coromandel tomorrow morning. Waikato and the Bay of Plenty, occasional rain or showers with possible thunderstorms. Taupua, Waitomo, Taumaranui and Taihape, scattered showers with possible thunderstorms, mostly cloudy tomorrow with a few showers. For Gisborne, occasional showers for you. Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, a few showers becoming fine about the coast tomorrow afternoon. Taranaki to Wellington, mainly fine. A few showers developing in Taranaki tomorrow, also inland Manawatu and Whanganui. Marlborough and Canterbury, fine spells increasing, isolated showers inland during the afternoons. For Nelson and Buller, mainly fine and mostly cloudy about Golden Bay tomorrow with possible showers. Westland, Fiordland, Southland and Otago, mainly fine. Cloud developing about eastern Otago and Southland tomorrow night. And for the Chatham Islands, showers clearing and mainly fine weather. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
And Anna Thomas, and it's been great having you with us the past fortnight.
Always wonderful being here and working with such professionals.
Well, likewise. Anna Thomas, what a treat. Thank you, Anna. Right, let's return to our lead story tonight. What an extraordinary day across the ditch. The Australian High Court has ruled that 5 of 7 Australian politicians who were dual nationals are disqualified from holding public office, and that, of course, includes the Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, and means the Australian government loses its 1-seat majority in Parliament. Mr Joyce held a media conference and thanked the people of his New England electorate for their overwhelming support.
I respect the verdict of the court, and of course, as you have no alternative but, and I'll be making sure that now we offer the people of New England the best service and continue on with jobs. All these things are important because while we're managing a nation, we've also got to make sure we look after the people in our electorate. I was always apprehensive. People can ask me, some people say I'm a natural pessimist. I'm naturally cautious, and I was always prepared for this outcome. So I don't actually stand here totally surprised. I always expect that this was going to be a tough game. It's a pretty simple story. We're off to a by-election, and I put myself forward to the people of New England as their candidate. Love me or hate me, I think I work pretty hard, and I thank you so much for your support you've given me, and I will turn it in spades as I continue on my work for this great electorate.
Is this result proof you didn't do your due diligence? You did the wrong thing?
The statement of facts are as they are. I had no reason to believe that I was a citizen of any other country but Australia, and that's the way it is.
Barnaby Joyce speaking a short time ago. There will be a by-election. He has a very big majority in that electorate. Meanwhile, the Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull has welcomed the High Court ruling. A by-election will be held in December. Mr Turnbull says in the meantime the business of government goes on and his party still has a majority in the House of Representatives, along with support from the crossbenchers.
We welcome the court confirming Matt Canavan's eligibility to sit in the Senate, but are obviously disappointed that the court has found against Barnaby Joyce and Fiona Nash. We thank the court for its very timely consideration of this enormously complex matter and its clarification of the meaning and the operation of Section 44 of the Constitution as it relates to citizenship. Along with the Solicitor General, Stephen Donoghue QC, whose advice has been invaluable throughout this process, will closely evaluate the full implications of the court's decision, which will now be carefully considered by Australians and, of course, in particular by the Parliament. The government will refer the decision to the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters so that it is able to consider, among other things, whether any changes to Section 44 should be recommended, how the electoral laws and practices could be changed so as to minimise the risk of candidates being in breach of Section 44, and ensuring in our multicultural society that all Australians are able confidently to stand for and serve in our Parliament. Now, the past few months have been very stressful for Barnaby, Fiona and Matt, their families and their staff. But throughout, their commitment to the Parliament and the government has been undiminished. The people of New England will have their say on the 2nd of December. The Speaker has advised that he is going to issue the writ today. Barnaby Joyce is the best person, as we've seen already on the television, the best person to continue to deliver for New England and for Australians living in regional, remote and rural areas. He has a passion for representation, and while I know that Barnaby will be disappointed with the outcome of the court case, it's as though he's been let out of the stalls and he's ready and raring to go. His enthusiasm is absolutely infectious.
Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull talking a short time ago. We're delighted to welcome back to Checkpoint right now from Canberra, the Fairfax senior political correspondent, Stephanie Peatling. Stephanie, it's lovely to have you with us on the program. I've been enjoying your Twitter feed. It's been all on for young and old this afternoon. There's so much to discuss. First of all, you've just tweeted that Malcolm Turnbull will be delaying his trip to Israel.
Yeah, we understand that the Prime Minister, who was meant to be going to Israel tomorrow for the commemoration of the Battle of Beersheba, will now delay that trip. We understand that he will probably go, but not this evening as was anticipated. And this is probably quite useful because in his press conference a little while ago, he neglected to say who would be acting Prime Minister while he was away. So we're not quite sure who would be running the show.
Yeah, and the point is, who would it be?
Well, there's a pretty complicated chain of command because, as you know, Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, although he's no longer the Deputy Prime Minister, would normally take on that role. And also it becomes even more complicated because the Deputy National Party leader, Fiona Nash, has also been found to be ineligible to be in Parliament. So we think it would probably be Julie Bishop because she's the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party. But there is also a line of precedent suggests that could be George Brandis, who's the Attorney General, because of his status as the preeminent law officer in the land.
This is just quite an extraordinary state of affairs. Now, the by-election is December 2nd, right? And
that's correct.
If you had $1 to put on this, you would say that Barnaby Joyce is going to romp back home in New England, isn't he?
You would think so, yes.
Yeah, OK. So it's embarrassing but not terminal, but just things aren't going well for this government, right?
Well, look, you just never know. I mean, no one really likes to go to a by-election. You know, we only had a federal election in the middle of last year. It is fair to say that the Turnbull government is on the nose with the public, and you never really know what people are going to do when they're feeling a bit cranky and a bit cross. And, you know, 4 weeks out from Christmas, they've got to go and vote. You know, maybe they will stick the boot in. However, Mr Joyce is very popular in his electorate, and we've also just heard a few minutes ago that his nemesis and long-term rival in that area, Tony Windsor, will not be standing for election. So that probably makes Mr Joyce's life a lot easier.
You said that Malcolm Turnbull's government was on the nose with the Australian electorate. Why? What is it that has ruffled the feathers of Australia?
Well, I think the Australian population has been in a bit of a funk probably for, well, several years now, stemming largely from the fact that our political parties like to chop and change their leaders at the drop of a hat and without consulting the Australian people first. And Malcolm Turnbull himself did that to Tony Abbott in just a few years ago. He, of course, was re-elected in his own right, but I think things have been tough for Mr Turnbull. He came to the Prime Ministership as someone who was seen as, you know, very socially progressive. He was a believer in climate change. He was a campaigner for same-sex marriage. Since then, he has shown to be someone who is not going to stand up for those principles. He's very much wants to keep the more conservative end of his party happy. And I think that has put people offside. But there have also been a number of unpopular government decisions. He, of course, inherited the government of Tony Abbott. He had had a very harsh budget a little while before that. People didn't like that. There have been a number of changes that I think he is still trying to implement that people are just unhappy with.
Stephanie, one final question, because you must be frantically busy and we so appreciate your time. I see from your tweets the PM is flagging the possibility of changes to Section 44 of the Constitution, which has proven so entirely problematic here. And the High Court was required to interpret it, and they said, yep, no dual citizenship allowed. What sort of changes, if you're looking into the tea leaves, might we see introduced if they can get them through?
Yeah, look, it was just a very vague hint, as the Prime Minister said just a little while ago, that the decision of the High Court will be referred to the Parliament's Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Affairs to examine it and see what it thought. And he said specifically that one of the things they would look at was whether or not there was a case to change Section 44, which is the section that has brought everyone unstuck, because as you would know, Australia is a country of migrants, and we want to make sure that people who were born in another country and who came here, or who may have problems of citizenship by descent, are still able to stand for Parliament.
Yeah.
So he's definitely leaving that door open.
Stephanie Peatling, who is Fairfax, our senior political correspondent, joining us live from Canberra. Thank you so much for your time, Stephanie. Stephanie, who is filing frantically for The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald, and of course Fairfax's online sites. It's 18 minutes past 6, coming to the end of the week on Checkpoint. Demolition is already underway of a large building that caught fire in Auckland last night. At its height, crews from 13 fire engines were battling the blaze. The fire service have now left the scene, with the cause likely to be known in several weeks. The building's owners have already begun demolition in the hope of getting the building out of the way of nearby train tracks by tomorrow morning for train commuters heading to the Rugby League World Cup this weekend. Bridget Mills has been at the scene today.
Daylights revealed the badly damaged building collapsed in the middle. You can see charred edges of metal sheeting and wooden frames sticking out the side. It backs right onto the train tracks just a few hundred metres up from Penrose Station, and the threat of it collapsing meant that trains were cancelled during the morning's commute. The building, a sales centre selling concrete pipes, is in the industrial area of Great South Road. It's owned by Hume, a subsidiary of Fletcher's, which has its own large warehouse next door. The fire investigator at the scene, Jason Goffin, was making sure the building wouldn't collapse before he went in to examine it.
Obviously it's a substantial loss. A significant part of the building is damaged. It's probably going to be a total loss. So yeah, it is on a bigger scale of incidents that we attend.
The owner of the adjacent business, Peter P.J. Johnson, arrived home from Texas yesterday to a phone call telling him the building next door to his car yard was ablaze.
Yeah, well, luckily that our security guard had opened the gates and let the fire brigade on our side, so they're able to douse our building. And there was some intense heat coming from next door, and she's a little bit cindered down the side of our building today. But we're very, very lucky that we didn't lose a whole lot of cars.
So, and most importantly, no one injured, and business today sort of as back to usual?
Yeah, no, just extremely lucky that, we've got power back on now and we can operate, and no one was hurt, and the building next door looks very worse for wear, and it'll be coming down very shortly. I think the engineers are in there now and looking at that. But no, it was certainly a big fire, and it amazed me that the building wasn't that big, but man, with the flames were shooting so high, I couldn't believe what was going on.
The investigation is being carried out today to find out what caused it. PJ says it was an older building and doesn't believe it had sprinklers. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahine, ko Bridget Mills tēnei.
Residents in the north of Auckland are divided on plans to bring in a regional fuel tax of 10 cents a litre, a levy to help pay for better public transport, including rail. The people of Orewa weren't even Aucklanders until the super city 7 years ago. So what do they think about having to pay a regional fuel tax? Our reporter Jessie Chang went to find out.
30 minutes north of the Auckland CBD, people living in Orewa had mixed views on the tax. Paula Kerning, who has lived in the area for 9 years, is unconvinced.
We are only 30 minutes from the city, but given that we're not getting any benefit from it, it's a little bit unfair in that sense. I know that fuel is already a lot more expensive here than other parts of the city.
This man says he already fills up in South Auckland when he's there because petrol prices are so expensive in Orewa. He says the tax is a terrible idea.
I don't think we should have to pay for it, no. People think Orewa is a rich area, so petrol prices are always dearer up here than in South.
He says he would consider driving across the Auckland border about 40 minutes away for petrol. But this woman says it's ridiculous to drive out of the city just to avoid the tax.
Probably some people will, but it's just no common sense there, because all the petrol that you waste going out of the city, it's just silly.
Namisha Odedra says she's still happy to pay the levy, even if she won't benefit as much from it as more central Aucklanders.
I think it's actually a really positive thing, because it's going to get more people to use the public transport,
and it's actually bringing Auckland City in line with other cities.
Gordon Hill, who has lived in the Hibiscus Coast for over 7 years, says more rail will take cars off the road.
If you travel to the airport from Rewa, then you ain't going to hit so much traffic. So it will benefit you in some way in the long term.
The new Transport Minister Phil Twyford has said the railway links will cost $15 billion over the next decade. He said the fuel tax would bring in $150 million a year and make up 10% of the overall cost of the project. For Checkpoint, call Jesse Changaho.
A shortage of veggies and wheat are just two of the flow-on effects of unprecedented rain over winter in many parts of the country. By last month, regions such as Waikato, Taranaki, Horowhenua and parts of Canterbury had already had their average annual rainfall, and most places the sun is starting to come out. But the aftermath of the big wet will be felt for some time. Andrew McRae finds out how farmers are faring.
Bharat Bana oversees 600 hectares of root vegetables growing on the fertile soil just outside of Pukekohe. He says it's rained pretty much since March, which is unheard of in the area.
Well, all the crops are behind, and any crops that we had in the fields, like potatoes that we're ready to harvest, but anything that was submerged underwater with all that rain has actually rotted the bottom layer out. So we reckon we've probably lost at least a third of our crop.
Bharat Bana says his business, which employs 54 staff, has taken a real hit.
It is a knock. How big it is, we don't realise yet. You know, like the people always say, oh, well, the prices go up, but sometimes the prices go up, but they don't reflect the amount of losses that you've had.
Bharat Bana's neighbour is Alan Fong, who trades under the Fresh Grower brand. He grows 30 different varieties of green leaf vegetables on his 200 hectares. Mr Fong describes the supply of veggies to market as haphazard.
Because ground conditions have been quite challenging, so germinations and plant growth hasn't been as good as what we normally do, and establishment hasn't been so great, so just purely because of the erratic heavy rainfalls we've been having so consistently.
Alan Fong says an improvement in the weather is giving them a chance to get the ground ready for planting seeds. He says while things are on the back foot, there's light at the end of the tunnel.
The soil's really, really cloddy and it's very wet underfoot. So we're actually deep cultivating now to try and aerate it and just get some oxygen into the soil and let it dry out, and hopefully we can condition it back to good performing, back to the condition that it should be anyway, so the plants can perform well.
In Waikato, dairy farmers got through calving struggling in the wet and mud, and now mating's underway. Wayne Reynolds farms at Gordonton. He's been on the land for 14 seasons and has never experienced such a wet period.
We were having trouble getting in and out of paddocks with calf feeder and motorbikes.
So miserable all round by the sound of it?
Miserable, yes. Yep, testing, miserable.
Cam Lewis is both a dairy farmer and an asparagus grower in Horowhenua. He says the very wet winter has been extremely challenging for both sides of the business.
So we're currently down about 50% on a daily basis, and for the season. We believe that our asparagus never recharged itself properly last summer when it was meant to be busily photosynthesising. But probably the main impact has been that we've had beds underwater for 3 months really, and some of it's still underwater now, and some only very recently in the last week seeing daylight for the first time.
He says asparagus lovers are going to find it hard.
There's a lot less around, which is reflective in the price at the moment. You're seeing the price slightly higher than you normally would. Traditionally, Labour weekend is when New Zealand has quite an oversupply in asparagus, and it tends to be at its cheapest, but that's certainly not going to be the case this year.
Joanne Burke's an arable farmer in mid-Canterbury. Endless rain over the winter and into spring seriously put back planting on her 300-hectare property. She says wheat didn't get planted in autumn, and the decision was to go with spring barley instead.
So that could have an effect on the spot price of the wheat, possibly spot price for anyone that's got some free milling wheat out there or feed wheat, and then obviously it's going to change the volumes of what we've got for feed barley as well.
In the next few months, NIWA predicts rainfall totals are equally likely to be normal or above normal for the north of the North Island and normal for the rest of the country. And for consumers, that could mean fewer vegetables on the shelves and higher prices. For Checkpoint, Core Andrew McRae.
Tonga's been the talk of the town in the lead up to the Rugby League World Cup, but the Pacific country and its neighbours say it's time their players are paid the same as those representing the sport's big three nations. Several players have defected from New Zealand and Australia to represent their Pacific heritage ahead of the tournament, which starts this weekend, but by doing so they've foregone big paydays. Matt Chatterton reports.
The New Zealand Kiwis and Samoa Rugby League team shared the stage as hundreds of school children officially welcomed them with a haka and sivatau in downtown Auckland this week. But when it comes to pay, there's nothing even about the two teams. This year's World Cup, co-hosted between New Zealand, Australia and Papua New Guinea, is being touted as the most competitive yet, with teams from Oceania, Europe and the Americas well represented. However, only New Zealand, Australia and England players will reap the financial benefits of the tournament. Toa Samoa coach Matt Parrish believes it's time the Rugby League International Federation steps in to sort out the pay disparity.
They need to have some spine and make sure that every team in the tournament gets the same amount of money. Then we'll see a much evener contest. You know, at the moment when you've got three teams getting $20,000 a game and you've got the rest of us getting pittance, it's very unfair and very uneven. But if you pay everyone the same amount of money, then let the players choose who they want to play for. I can tell you then it'll be a lot different story.
Parrish has support from the Tongan League team who have emerged as a dark horse for this year's tournament, with the addition of defecting Kiwi superstar Jason Taumalolo and Kangaroos prop Andrew Fafita. But Tonga's coach Christian Wolfe argues that the playing field remains far from even.
There's obviously been a fair bit made of the fact that some guys chose to play for us as opposed to some of the bigger nations, and the sacrifice that those guys have made is enormous. And something that most people just wouldn't do, to be quite frank. And I think if there was a little bit more even ground there, then you'd see a lot more of those decisions made.
For players such as Taumalolo and Fafita, the decision to play for Tonga is easier for them because of their high NRL salaries. But for less successful players, that isn't the case. Under the current payment structure for the World Cup, players are paid by their national body, but the developing nations in the Pacific can't pull in the same sponsorships as the Tier 1 teams. The International Federation says it's working at ways to bridge the gap, but with no solution yet, countries like Fiji, Tonga and Samoa will have to keep waiting for their payday. For Checkpoint, Matt Chatterton.
And that ends Checkpoint for this week. Thank you so much for being with us. On behalf of our team, led by executive producer Pip Keane, Bridget Burke, Zach Fleming, Michelle Cook, Brad White, our wonderful cameraman who is moving to Christchurch this weekend. Good luck, Brad. Kelvin Samuel, Blair Stagpool and me. Thank you so much for being with us. We hope you have a wonderful weekend and we look forward to seeing you, all things being equal, Monday at 5.
NZ News headlines at 6:30. Australia's government has just lost its one-seat majority after the High Court disqualified the Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce from Parliament because he was a New Zealand citizen when elected. A campaign group is celebrating after the Minister of Regional Development announced plans to revive the network in Northland. Equity New Zealand says the Hobbit law, which the government has vowed to repeal, should never have passed. And a solo mother is appealing a decision to prosecute her for not declaring money she borrowed while on a benefit. Our next news and weather at 7.
G'day. This week on Country Life, a dairy farmer in Southland says no to chemicals.
Our families have quite a history of cancer, and so we believe that the food chain has something to do with that and the chemicals and all in it. So we actually didn't set out to be organic. We set out just to take some of them nasty chemicals